Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of May 16th in the year 2025. And my next guest is someone I've known for a long time from back in the Rising Up Angry, Black Panther, Young Lord, Rainbow Coalition days. He's Jeffrey Haas, a lawyer. He is the author of the book, The Assassination of Fred Hampton, a longtime attorney with the People's Law Office, whose clients have included the Black Panther Party, Students for Democratic Society members, community activists, all kind of people opposed to the war in Vietnam, and a number of other clients, including, I think, the Puerto Rican nationalists, protesters who were opposed to violations on human rights being overlooked, and police torture. With all that said, and that's a whole lot of stuff that you've done, Jeff, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good, Michael, and it's good to see you and good to see my old friends in Chicago last weekend for my law partner, Michael Deutsch's 80th birthday.
That was a lot of party for him. We saw each other on not only Friday night, but at that wonderful event at the Puerto Rican Cultural Center out on Division. Let's just start off with you giving us a little bit of overview, talk as long as you like about the things that you were involved in and how you got involved. How did you first decide to become a people's lawyer?
Well, I started kind of slow. I was a late developer, maybe. I ended up in Chicago, 64 to 67. I was at the University of Chicago Law School, not knowing exactly what I wanted to do with law. And so some things happened to me. Being in Chicago in the mid-60s was a very exciting time. It seemed like the world was focused there. You had Dr. King had come there to integrate Chicago. You had SDS. We had the Panther chapter starting, the Young Lords, the Young Patriots, Rising Up Angry. So there was a lot going on. There was also a young woman in my law school named Bernadine Doran. And I met Bernadine, and she actually had me go back and work in the South with a civil rights firm one summer in law school. So that was sort of my start. And then rather than go back and work with my dad's firm, I took a job at Legal Aid in Chicago, working primarily in the Black community. So that was an eye-opener for me. And then one day when Dr. King was murdered and there had been riots on the west side of Chicago, they were just picking up all these kids. So I decided, and they were telling white people to hunker down and don't go in these neighborhoods. I went down to the 11th and State, the police station, and defended some of these kids who were just picked up so they could get out to go to school the next day or to go to their jobs. And I met this guy named Dennis Cunningham, who was the other lawyer who showed up. So Dennis was a very much a visionary lawyer, and he had been introduced to Fred Hampton, the leader of the Panthers, and Howard Hawks, who you know probably made the movie The Murder of Fred Hampton, introduced them, and Fred Hampton, and he said, "This is Dennis Cunningham, a people's lawyer." And Fred said, "Well, I always wanted to be a people's lawyer. I wanted to be a lawyer too, and but I don't think I have time. But we need a people's law office." So with that sort of mandate, Dennis picked myself and 3 other lawyers and 2 law students, and we started the People's Law Office in the summer of 1969 in a former sausage shop on Halsted and Webster. And it was very active in those days because we represented the Panthers, the Young Lords, Rising Up Angry, SDS, the Weather People. Almost from the day we opened, we were really busy. And we learned a lot about the courts and a lot about repression because these people were getting busted for selling newspapers, for being at protest. And there was a Puerto Rican, Manuel Ramos, who was murdered by the police, and there was a march around that. So I sort of got stuck in, but wanted to be in the middle of it. We also had people who'd been arrested at the Democratic Convention in '68. And then 3 months after we opened our office, I had just been at the Panther office, and the Panthers were trying to buy their building because they were getting evicted because they had been attacked so many times by the police. And then at 6:30 in the morning on December 4th, my law partner, Skip Andrew, woke me up and said Fred Hampton had been murdered in his bed. And he said, I'm going to go to the apartment. And I said, what do I do? And I said, well, 3 of the survivors are in the Wood Street police station. You can go talk to them. And so I went down and met, at that time, Deborah Johnson, who was Fred's fiance, who was in bed next to him. And she told me the horrible story that the police had come in shooting. When there was a lull, they had pulled 2 people out of her bedroom, had walked in, and one cop said, is he dead yet? And then she heard 2 shots, and another cop said, he's good and dead now. And that's how my, I guess, commitment increased substantially as we began a lawsuit for 13 years to uncover what happened to Fred Hampton. Flint Taylor and many other people from the People's Law Office pursued what we thought was a case against the Chicago police, and it turned out the FBI was very much involved, had provided the police a floor plan of the apartment where Fred, including the bed where Fred and Deborah would be sleeping. So I think that case and knowing Fred was the beginning of my, it was a pretty strong introduction. And from that time on, we started doing civil rights cases. We represented some Panthers in Southern Illinois. And we met the people in Marion Prison, and we became very involved in prison work. I also went to Attica a couple of days after the rebellion there and talked to some of the men and heard the horrible conditions and the killings that were done there after they had taken over the prison. So that's sort of how I got involved. And indeed, some people say what a great commitment, but it was a real privilege to meet the leaders of these groups. Of course, Fred Hampton, Cha-Cha Jimenez, the leaders of you and the Rising Up Angry folks, the SDS leaders who I've maintained a friendship with. So I've continued, and I worked at the People's Law Office from 1969 to 2001 when I moved to New Mexico.
Well, yeah, it's a lot of history there, and it brings back the memories. Dennis was my lawyer from my first bust, and he's sorely missed. He passed away about a year ago, a little longer maybe, but he was quite a guy, and it's really good. I didn't really know the part that was Fred Hampton was the one that encouraged you all to start the People's Law Office, but I remember that law office, and I remember all of you, and I'm so glad that so many of us are still around and doing that stuff. You went on and wrote a book about Fred Hampton called The Assassination of Fred Hampton. I know you've been on Live from the Heartland years back where we talked about the book. What was it like for you to shift from being a lawyer for all those years, probably close to 40, and then becoming a writer? And did you go back to school and study writing, or did you just go for it?
Well, writing had not even been exactly my forte, even at People's Law Office. But of course, we did write briefs. But you could practice law for a long time, and you'd never write a scene where somebody walked into a room and had to describe the expressions on everybody else's face and the reaction. So I was going to write it sort of like a narrative. And Bill Ayers, who's a friend of mine, has been a friend for a long time, said, why don't you do what I do, go back to Bennington? So I did, and went back to Bennington at age 60 and got an MFA in creative nonfiction. So I wrote it as a memoir, not just, I recounted the events, but made them personal. Not only what did you see, but how did you feel? What did you think? What was it like to experience, to see Deborah Johnson that morning after Fred had been murdered, or to get a jury verdict in that case finally, or to spend 13 years fighting that case? So I wanted to give people a sense of the times and what it felt like, as well as what happened. And it was a challenge, but it was really good. And they did teach me how to write in a very different way, in a personal way. So I really like that. As a civil rights lawyer, I really hadn't had time to put that whole story together about how all the machinations that went into the murder of Fred Hampton, the cover-up, the discovery of O'Neill, the informant, the fact that the FBI had actually sent a letter to the head of the Blackstone Rangers telling them that Fred was going to try to kill them in an attempt to get the Rangers to attack Fred Hampton's. And similarly, they'd sent a similar letter to the Panthers. So we learned a lot about FBI COINTELPRO. Of course, it wasn't just the Panthers, although I think they were the main target, but so were the Young Lords, so was SDS, so was the Puerto Rican movement. So anyway, I learned a lot. As they said at Bennington, if you don't learn as you write, nothing learned for the writer, nothing learned for the reader. So in writing the book also, I think I understood things better.
Well, Jeff, the book I would imagine, got a little bump when that movie came out called Judas and the Black Messiah. I mean, it brought back Fred to the attention on a broader scale. And I'm just wondering if that's true, that was there a renewed interest in the book? And then actually, what's your take on that movie and how is it worthwhile? Is it, there's a lot of different views on it.
Yeah. Well, the book got a big jump with the Black Lives Matter movement, and then also when the movie came out. And so a lot more interest in Fred Hampton and the Panthers. I learned, I guess it was a little bit a fault. It was actually my book that I learned that got the people interested who actually made the movie, even though we got no credit for it. The information that we learned in this case was the basis for the movie. I'm glad that it was made. I'm glad that people learned more about Fred and the Panthers and what a dynamic person he was. I have some reservation that O'Neill was elevated to the equal of Fred in a certain way. It makes a great story, like Othello and Iago, sort of the villain and the hero. But I don't agree with that. Another thing I think, and you can't do everything in a movie, but I think one of the things lacking is, well, two things. One is you didn't get a sense of the youthfulness of the Panthers. They were 20, 21, 22. The actors were 30, and they were great, but it was that was missed. And the other thing you didn't get a sense of is, where did Fred Hampton come from? His family, his mother had migrated from Louisiana. His mother was a Union steward. A lot of his strength came from his parents, from his history, how his parents met. And, you can't do everything in a movie, but Fred didn't just come from nowhere. He came from a Black history, a migration, a movement. And that's something I think after Fred was killed, Flint and I spent a lot of time with the Hampton family. I actually went back to where Fred's buried in Louisiana and spent some time with his mother and father and sister and brother. So there's a fuller story. So I'm glad the movie was made, and I hope people dig further and learn more about the Panthers and what they were about. And of course, as you know, they had the Breakfast for Children program. They had a health clinic. They sold newspapers. And they were very, very popular. And also, Fred's murder changed the politics of Chicago. I think until then, many of the Black politicians had been totally beholden to Daley, the mayor. And when Fred was killed, many spoke out, including Harold Washington and others who hadn't done that before. So I think the coalition that came together that objected to Fred's murder of Black people, the Black community, and liberal white people had a big influence on the city. So studying that, it was really interesting too.
Yeah, no, this is good. Real briefly, because I want to go on to some other things, but are you still writing? Are you doing any more books? Are you doing more memoirs?
I have not done any more books. I regret that I did not take more advantage of some of the things that I learned in Bennington. I have written articles. I have continued to do law. Having moved to New Mexico, I think issues of environment and indigenous struggles have also come into kind of the law that I've been doing. My last case was representing the people who took down a conquistador statue in the middle of Santa Fe at the plaza that had the engraving to the soldiers who killed the savage Indians. And so that was what I've done. And then more recently, I and it was the Panthers for me. And then we did a lot of work in the Central American movement with Iranian students, with ACT UP in Chicago, really learned a lot, the Puerto Rican community. And more recently, I've really done work around Palestine and trying to raise the issue of the occupation, the apartheid, and now the genocide that's going on there.
You were just in Baltimore at the Jewish Voice for Peace at their national convention. How come you went, and what actually happened there? Because I ask a lot of people, particularly my guests who are Jewish and are progressive, about this genocidal war in Gaza and the opposition to it by younger people in this country, and the Democrats, trying to get back in power, or at least some alleviation from the current situation, and what that issue is. Unless the Democrats deal with that, the Palestine question, we got some problems, I think, ahead of us.
Well, there's a huge gap between what the populace, particularly the Democrats, but even the Republicans, some 70 or 80% of Democratic voters are opposed to keep giving military aid to Israel and supporting the genocide that's going on in Gaza. And yet our elected officials, and of course Biden was an example of that, are still, many of them are clinging to this idea of it's political suicide to oppose what Israel is doing in Gaza and in the West Bank now. So I went there because I thought JVP has been particularly effective as soon as after October 7th, when this fear came out about Palestinians. As a Jewish group, they occupied Grand Central Station and spoke out and said, "Not in our name." And that's particularly important. I have a history, in a way. My grandfather defended Leo Frank, was a Jewish man who was lynched in Georgia. And my grandfather represented him. He was lynched after being hung and after being framed up for what was supposedly a ritual murder. When the governor of Georgia actually pardoned him, or at least commuted his sentence, a lynch mob from Atlanta came. And my temple was bombed also in 1958 when my rabbi honored Dr. King in Atlanta after he won the Nobel Prize. So I know what anti-Semitism is, but it has nothing to do with to claim that supporting Palestinian rights and opposing Zionism is anti-Semitic is ridiculous to me, who have experienced anti-Semitism. And I think that's one of the things that's made Jewish Voice for Peace very effective, because they say, "Not in our name." That is not our religion. To me, the background is standing up for people who are oppressed, wanting equality for everyone, never again for anyone. And I think that's a growing sentiment, particularly among young Jews. So I'm not totally identified just as a Jew. I'm also a human rights and civil rights lawyer. And I'm just horrified at what's going on, and the fact it's with U.S. weapons. It's with U.S. support. It's with U.S. diplomatic support. And, right now people are starving in Gaza. And I thought that there were 2,000 people at this JVP conference, and mostly young people with a lot of energy. It reminded me a little bit of the 60s, that people were really fired up. Of course, no one was under the illusion that we were about to win or change. But I think you're right. The Democratic Party, I think, partly lost the election because they couldn't get the young people enthusiastic. How could you, and because Biden was supplying the bombs to kill Palestinians. So it's going to be a fight in the Democratic Party. And I hope the young people and the progressive people take over and win that, because I don't think the Democrats are going to claim any moral high ground as long as they're supporting this war.
Well, that's good, Jeff. How about a little bit more on how being anti-Zionist does not mean you're anti-Semitic, and maybe
Yeah.
the role that the current administration in Washington is involving this whole question of anti-Semitism to kind of crush up, protest.
Well, Project 2025 lays out the idea that let's stop free speech and protest against what the U.S. and Israel are doing. And so let's weaponize anti-Semitism and say that standing up for Palestinian rights is anti-Semitic. Zionism is a philosophy. Recently, it's not Judaism. It takes the idea that, and there is a element of Jewish supremacy in Zionism, that they have a right to this land that belonged to the Palestinians and to a state where being Jewish Jews have more rights than anyone else. And I don't accept that. That's not what Judaism is about. Never again doesn't mean we get to dominate other people, because we were. And I think it's really taking on that. And there's many groups, including a rabbi in Chicago named Rabbi Rosen, I think, who's really spoken out very clearly. And JVP is now deliberately anti-Zionist. So I think to be anti-Zionist is to be anti any group having a superior right within a country. You can't have a democracy and then have one group, whether it's an ethnic group or a religious group, have superiority. So we separate Judaism from Zionism, actually feel like they're contradictory. Much of the history of Zionism was actually created by Christian reactionaries who didn't want Jews in England and the U.S. It wasn't, it isn't the history of Judaism that we're proud of, or that we think is really being Jewish.
Jeff, one of the things, we only had a couple of minutes left, but you're living in New Mexico, and I would imagine that there are a lot of undocumented workers there, and that the immigration issue is a big one. What's your take on how people out in your part of Southwest are on the immigration issue and some of the negativity around that? What are you seeing?
I think New Mexico, on that issue, we are a blue state in some ways. There's great opposition, but there's a lot of, just like you said, they're arresting people. They're using our prisons, filling them up with people who are ICE arrested, and they're trying to deport. It's very frightening. And like Santa Fe and both Albuquerque have sought not to cooperate with the police, but and the governor. So I think the stated position, but unfortunately, we are a border state. We have a border, and now they've declared 100 miles it belongs to federal jurisdiction. So there are a lot of arrests in New Mexico. They're putting them in prisons. They're deporting people. It's very, very scary. And people who don't have citizenship and people who speak out, Palestinians are very wary of speaking out because they have friends and relatives who might get the repercussions, or they won't be able to go back. So we're trying to do that and not put people in jeopardy, but trying to raise the issue. We're having tomorrow is the anniversary of the Nakba from 1948, the expulsion of Palestinians, which basically has continued for 77 years. I'm sure there'll be protests in Chicago too. But it's gotten to the point where it's gotten more beyond apartheid to ethnic cleansing to another Holocaust to a genocide. And so we have to speak out. And I think the future for any moral person is to join and to protest what's going on in Palestine right now to Palestinians.
Well, Jeff, you're a hell of a guy. And let me just ask you, what do you do for fun and to stay in shape?
I still get out. I play pickleball 3 times a week.
Good.
That's a lot of fun. And I'm not sure my days on the tennis court are over, but pickleball is really a lot of fun. And I enjoy that. Thank you. You've always been a sports person, so I know that's a very relevant question.
Well, as an old guy, I'm 83 now, and I'm really aware of what the body does and how it changes, no matter how much you try to keep it together. And I also think it's important for people to, the progressives a lot of time ignore sports and badmouth sports. Some of them do. I think that's always been a mistake. There's a lot of progressive things in sports. And I think it's important for people to take care of their bodies. So that's why I asked that question.
Well, it's good. I remember used to see you at the Evanston Y before I moved away from Chicago.
Yeah, I'm still there. I'm in that 4 times a week. Yeah.
Good
I'll
for you.
look forward to seeing you. Probably the next time you might see me in New Mexico. I go down to El Paso on Father's Day, so I'm real close to the border, and I do go into New Mexico a little bit. I don't know where you're located, but you're in Santa Fe?
I'm in Santa Fe, but yeah, come by. Sometime
I'll come see you.
Okay.